Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amanda Coventry-Barrage, and I'm DWDC's Program Coordinator. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Kelsey Goforth and Catherine Martins. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that while we are meeting virtually, the land Dying with Dignity Canada is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we invite and encourage you to do your own research regarding the various treaties, in particular the land in which you're on while meeting with us today. So I am thrilled to welcome you today to another webinar. Through our webinars, we aim to provide you with information and key takeaways, as well as create a conversation on end-of-life topics alongside the professionals that know it best. Before I welcome today's speakers, however, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. So everyone on the call today is muted. However, there will be opportunities to submit your questions. To do so, please type your questions into the question bar on the Zoom side panel, and we will read it out for you at the end. Please try to keep your questions as concise and clear as possible. And while we are going to try to get to everyone's questions, unfortunately, we may not get to everyone. So if you have any outstanding questions or concerns or questions that are quite personal in nature, please email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca and we will follow up. This session will be recorded, so there's no need to take notes if you don't want to. And finally, there's going to be a post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen after the webinar and will give you the opportunity to share your much appreciated, much needed feedback. So stay tuned for that at the end. All right, and last but not least, I'd like to take a moment to spotlight an upcoming special project that will be premiering on World Right to Die Day this November 2nd. In My Own Time is a documentary that looks at what it means to die on one's own terms. Using first-hand accounts from people across Canada, this film will offer perspectives on medical assistance in dying, or MAID, less commonly seen in media reports, and present an opportunity to educate people on end-of-life choice in Canada. So that's going to be on November 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dying with Dignity Canada will be hosting the premiere of In My Own Time at Scotiabank Theatre in downtown Toronto. Other screenings will be taking place across Canada throughout the month of November, so be sure to follow us on social media for updates. And we hope that you can join us. Okay, and now to introduce today's speakers. Thank you so much to our panel for joining us today. Up first, we have Dr. Jordana Salma. She's a registered nurse and an assistant professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Alberta. Her research program focuses on the health and well-being of immigrant and racialized older adults in Canada. Jordana's work explores diverse experiences of aging and aims to address health inequities that emerge from multiple intersections of disadvantage. The majority of her research to date has been with Arab, South Asian, African, and Muslim communities in Alberta. Jordana uses participatory approaches to engage communities in the research process and uses storytelling to highlight the perspectives of older adults. Examples of research that she's currently working on includes exploring Muslim older women's experiences of social connectedness, addressing climate change resilience in immigrant older adults, and evaluating immigrant older adults' digital literacy needs. So thank you so much, Jordana, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. And last but certainly not least, we have Salwa Kadri. Salwa is the program and office manager for the Al Rashid Mosque, the first of its kind in Canada when it was built in 1938. Over the past 15 years, Salwa has collected and archived the stories, photographs, and lessons from community members across Alberta. Her works include Al Rashid, A Canadian Legacy, and the academic publication Building Canadian Communities with Dr. Earl Waugh. Outside of work, Salwa invests her time in a number of philanthropic and charitable causes. She's also one of the few Muslims to achieve a funeral director's lenience, and plans to finish a funeral guidebook for grieving families. So, Salwa, thank you so much for joining us. All right. So thank you so much to our panel for joining us today. I'm now going to pass it on to Kat to get us started with the interview.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Amanda. We're going to get started with our interview questions. So to get us started, can you tell us a bit about the Muslim faith, its history, and some common practices associated with it? So Salwa, maybe you'd like to begin?
Sure. So the Muslim faith, it's Islamic. Islam is the religion. Muslims are the people that follow Islam. It's 1445 years old. So we follow the lunar calendar, and we also count the months by the moon. And this year is 1445, and it originated in Mecca, Arabia. The Muslim faith, there's 5 actions that we believe in. You have to have a testimony and do your what we call as the shahada, and it's to bear witness that there's one God and that Muhammad is the final messenger. We also have 5, the part of our 5 actions is to pay your charity. That's mandatory. That we call it a zakat. Prayer, we must pray 5 times a day. We have fasting. Fasting, the holy month of Ramadan is mandatory. And of course, there's like, rulings for the sick, the old, the expecting mothers, but you have to kind of substitute it with something else like feeding poor or making up the days outside of Ramadan, but it is mandatory. And the last action that we have is to visit the holy city of Mecca and do a pilgrimage there. And of course, if you can't afford it, there's always a ruling for your exception. But if you can afford it, you are accountable to take that action once in your lifetime. Other people do it because they find it like a retreat and a journey to kind of get back on track, especially with rewards of prayers. Then we have a belief system. We must believe in the one God and that Muhammad is his messenger. We must also believe in all the prophets, which would include Adam, Moses, Jesus, Abraham, and the many prophets that we both learn about. We have to believe in Jesus and in Moses, and if you don't believe them, then you can't be Muslim. So it's a belief system. We have to believe in the angels. We have to believe in all the scriptures, which would mean the 10 Commandments, the Gospels of Jesus, the songs of David, and these are all in the Quran. And of course, I believe they're in the Bible too. We have to believe in the day of judgment, that there is accountability and everyone is accountable. And we also believe in free will and destiny. And people get that a little bit mixed up, free will and destiny. For example, it was your free will to go walk towards a store or something. I'm just making it up right now. I didn't think of a good example before I sat down. And say you decided to rob that store. Well, that your destiny is to be at that place, but your free will is to rob it or not. That's your accountability. So you have your destiny. You're supposed to be at that place at that time. But what happens sometimes it's in our hands. The choices that we make as a free will. So our belief system and our actions are very important to Muslims. This is the handful of things that we can do to be a Muslim. And that's the history of it. It started in Mecca, and it was a revelation from God by the angel Jibril to our prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And from there, Islam grew. It grew, actually. It went to Spain, and the only place it eventually came to North America.
Thank you for that. And you touched a little bit on this, but you mentioned that Ramadan is something that all Muslims take part in. Can you just touch a little bit upon that and what that means to a Muslim person or what that looks like?
So Ramadan is the 9th month of the year, the lunar calendar. It moves up 10 days every year. So you can never plan for Ramadan at the same time every year, like Christmas or Easter. It moves up 10 days. It's the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, and everybody around the world that's Muslim will be fasting from the moment the sun rises till the moment the sun sets. And it's not just about like fasting. You can't like fast and not eat and not pray. and you can't fast and not pay your charity, or this is where your charity are double rewarded and triple rewarded, and certain things that we do in Ramadan. So, and you can't lie, you can't steal, you can't cheat, because you break your fast. Fasting is a sacrifice that we take upon a lot of things. That this is our chance to better ourselves, our chance to kind of humble ourselves. And it's very, like, you can't like, it's very educational piece for Muslims more than non-Muslims. This is the chance where, when I was younger, I didn't wear the hijab all the time, but in Ramadan we practice wearing the hijab. We practice a lot of things that we didn't do, and in the hope that they carry on these good traits and these good charity acts to the rest of the year. So it is mandatory, and it is this is a time where I know a lot of Muslims also, they turn off their social media. They bring their kids to the mosque more, and they do more charity acts. They go, for example, feeding homeless, or they try to entertain their kids with acts of charity, and even just visiting old folks center and stuff like that. So Ramadan is a holy month. Even fighting kind of breaks your fast. Backbiting, if you were, and I think it's a very special time. It gets really, really exciting at the beginning because your system is really full of food. I'm not going to lie to you. It does cause sometimes, for me personally, an eating disorder, a sleeping disorder, because nobody sleeps, nobody eats properly. And at the very beginning, it's very, very exciting time because your system is really full of water and food and stuff like that. So you're anxious to do all these things. By the third week, the fourth week, you're like, oh, I just want to celebrate Ramadan and the achievements, but it's not the same. Also, the Quran, memorizing prayers from the Quran is very important to us. And this is the chance where you can actually complete the Quran, and there are rewards. Yeah, it's a month of reward for us, and it's an act of worship that we have to do just to humble us and bring us back to reality. A lot of people like to use the excuse of, it really makes you feel how poor people would feel by not having food for 12 hours. There was one time in Edmonton here, I think we were fasting for 19 hours. And that's tough. I thought it was tough on the kids at the beginning. But then when I got a chance to go overseas and see the real poverty and the real people that don't have food after 19 hours, I got a little bit tough with my kids. I'm like, you know what, tough it out, tough it out. Just it gives you a chance. It gives you a chance to humble yourself and to really feel what that hunger feels like. I remember a joke my brother said, what are you talking about? You don't want to be in their shoes. They want new shoes, the poor people. I'm like, no, it's not. The experience itself is overwhelming with the educational piece.
Thank you so much for all of that input. Very informative. So thank you so much. Jordana, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, briefly. Thank you, Salwa. I'm so happy you're here. That's a great summary. I think I'd just like to note a little bit of statistics and then some other key principles that I think are central to our discussion today, specifically around growing older and then also around death and dying. So we have about 4.9% of our population in Canada are Muslims. So they're the second largest religion in the country. And it's important to also note that they come from quite diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Salwa and I both come from the Levant region, Palestinian, Lebanese heritage, but really there are Muslims from all over the world, including in Canada. About 63% of Muslims in Canada are actually immigrants. So I want to start off with that. In terms of principles, I think Salwa covered the key sort of spiritual beliefs and practices and principles of Islam. There are also some key principles that we can think about when we talk about death and dying specifically. And I don't situate myself in this conversation as a a bioethicist or an expert on Islamic law or religion in any way. This is just my lived experience in terms of the principles I bring forward, and also what I see in the research when I'm talking to people, and what I've read in the literature in this area. So one of the first principles is that Allah, which is the Arabic word for the creator or God, is the creator of all life. So that's really critical. So the timing of death is determined by God. So God gives life and takes it. So this is, I think there are multiple religions that kind of have that ethos. Sanctity of human life. So taking human life is prohibited. Suffering is part of life. So that is very much under this umbrella of sabr, which means another Arabic word for patience, that one endures suffering over the lifetime, and that brings rewards in the afterlife. Of course, when Muslims talk about suffering, I don't believe, and Salwa can discuss this later a little bit too, that we're talking about unnecessary suffering. We're talking about unavoidable suffering, that when one faces it, one must endure. And the other really key principle is hope. Hope in Allah and God, that He can cure illness, that He can cure disease. And it is very much sort of a pillar of faith, is to have this ongoing sense of hope. And so there's this balance of enduring suffering, but also cultivating hope in an ongoing way. So I think these principles are key to understanding approaches to death and dying and how people tell their stories in this area. So, I mean, I'll stop for now, but I think we can come back to some of these principles throughout our discussion.
Of course, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you touched a little bit on the aging population and immigrant women and men populations. I'm just wondering, can you share a little bit about why you chose to pursue research in aging immigrant populations?
I always love that question because it can be a really long story. But I think the key reason is I have, they passed away, two grandmothers that were the center of my life, one in Canada, in Iroquois, in Ontario, and one in Beirut in Lebanon. And I was raised by these, largely and influenced by these two wonderful women. So the power of women in older age was always part of my life, I think. And then I became a nurse. And as a nurse, I worked with a lot of older adults. I worked in stroke was one of the main areas. And across many different units, I've taught many students on how to work with older adults. And of course, it becomes very apparent that your social position really impacts your quality of life in older age and what type of health outcomes we see, whether that's migration, whether that's poverty, whether that's belonging to any type of minoritized group in Canada. And I decided that's a great thing to look at for my PhD. And I went to Salwa. She was at the mosque, and I said, can I speak to some women in the community? And Salwa was really one of the first people who sort of supported my work. And to date, I've talked to about 150 Muslim older adults in our communities. And I've been part of about 26 research studies that look at migration and health. And it's been a wonderful journey.
Thank you so much. It sounds like a wonderful journey to be a part of, and sharing that with your elders and gaining that insight is very valuable. So thank you so much. On that note, Salwa, we'd love to get to know your role and how you came about being a program manager for the Al Rashid Mosque.
So I came back to the city in 1998, and I came back because actually my mother passed away. I spent some time with her, and then I stayed, and my sisters and I'm the oldest out of 6 kids, so they were all really young, and I thought, okay, I'm not gonna leave the city. I'm gonna stick around because they were very young. My mom was only 48. So being involved with the community, not going back to work. Like I was putting a lot of energy in where my kids would go, like their community leagues, their schools. And then after my mom passed away, I came here and I didn't want to go back to work. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to my community and look at our needs. Because you see, like Jordana said, it's a high number of immigrants, and it was probably higher back in 1998. Now we're looking at fourth, fifth, and even sixth generation Canadians. I'm pretty sure there's seventh generation Canadians here. It's a lot more accessible right now for information, but back then, like, we relied a lot on books. We relied a lot on legwork, not very much internet. I think I was the only person with an email address in my entire family. So I wanted to see the community grow. It was really important to me for my children because I took it for granted. My parents were immigrants and my grandparents were here as immigrants too. So I learned the language fast. I learned our religion fast. I did everything fast because I had everything in front of me at home. It's culture, right? A lot of Islamic culture, a lot of Arab culture, but my kids didn't have that. And we kind of like, all of a sudden my kids didn't speak Arabic. All of a sudden my kids didn't know how to pray. And it was my duty to get back involved into my community. That's just me, and a lot of people, they send their kids to school and they assume the school will do the job. But I think community starts at home too. What you practice, it goes out with you wherever you go. And I came here as a volunteer. I volunteered with the funeral society, with the front desk, and the communities just kept growing with needs. Oh, we need scholarships. They even have a housing project, got a banquet facility. They need a new school, a home for these several hundred kids that were in the mosque at the basement. So that was a project by itself, this Edmonton Islamic Academy project. Oh, we need our own cemetery. So I kind of grew with the projects that grew in this organization. And every time a project was put in front, we kind of like put it in place, hired the right people, and then moved on to another project. The Islamic Funeral Society, I kind of took a shot for the team too. I volunteered since 2008, but I did volunteer before. But in 2008, I was like a steady volunteer there. And we had like, we didn't have a licensed funeral director at the time. So we were outsourcing the work. And I felt like it would put 5 years later, of course, 6 years later, I felt like it would put more value to our work if we were licensed, so we can balance the regulations, the bylaws with Islamic values. So that kind of balanced things out, how I got my funeral director's license. But then I was like the volunteer coordinator, trying to make sure volunteers. And then the internet went wild and Google. And so there's a lot you can find online now. The stuff that we did before, it was a lot of legwork, a lot of research, a lot of talking, a lot of person to person. This meeting would not be like this right now. And the world has changed, and we just kind of changed with the world. So the Muslim needs changed, and they got a little bit more needy. And research, when Jordana came into the picture to do research, there wasn't a lot of research on Muslim population or immigrant population. I know I have a friend in the States, and she said her professor said, "You're going to do your people because we don't have enough information on you guys." So her professor chose her research. So now it's a little bit better. I think like now there's a lot of information on immigrants and Muslim population, but I don't think it was there 20 years ago. So when Jordana came into the picture, I was like, yeah, well, good. We got more information about us. Yeah, I could talk forever, so I'm going to stop.
That's okay. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think you both have very valuable experiences and different but same domains at the same time. And one of those is surrounding death and dying in the Muslim community. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So after a person has died, there are often ceremonies or practices that take place. Can you share what those ceremonies or practices look like in your faith and within your community? So maybe Salwa, you're the first Muslim woman in Alberta to become a certified funeral director, honoring and preserving the Islamic tradition when burying the deceased. And so why was it important for you to pursue this role and to uphold these traditions?
Yeah, like I said before, it put a lot more value to my work. And you cannot, like Jordana said, that we have ethnic backgrounds from Muslim communities. So you're talking about people from Africa, Albania, the Middle East, even like in China, even Canadian Muslims. So the cultural practices will differ from culture to culture. And even within that culture, it'll differ from family to family. And you can't expect a funeral from Africa to look the same as a funeral from Lebanon. They have cultural practices within. So our funeral society has, like, we have people from Bangladesh, we have people from Pakistan, from Somalia, from Lebanon, from, you have your Arab countries, which may be similar. And then, but then in that culture, it might differ. In that family culture, it might differ. Even within the family, they might differ of their practices. So we have to be really, really diverse and respect all of them. And that's why we like to have many, many cultures on our boards and on our committees and our volunteer groups. We want to have access to people from Turkey, or from Bosnia, and we want to have that relationship. Kenya. Last year, we counted 36 cultural backgrounds that came through our funeral society. Our job is the bare minimum, what is prescribed for us within the teachings of Islam. So our job is to make sure the deceased has final rights. And final rights are very, very basic. And they will be to try to bury the deceased within a very short time. Now, that stems from the idea of bad hygiene, like it's a hygiene problem if you keep the deceased around a long time. But there's also another spiritual reasoning that the soul needs to rest. And the final resting place is in their grave. We do not cremate. We do not, when we're within the law and there's no investigations, yeah, we should be burying within 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is, you have to try to do it right away. But in society, sometimes there's a homicide, there's like things going on, it's just not possible, or there's a transfer somewhere. But we treat the body as if they were still alive, using warm water to wash the body. That's another right of the deceased, is to wash them properly. We call it ghusl. It's prescribed to wash them as if we were going to be getting ready for prayers, the way we would wash ourselves. We have to shroud them. We call that kafan. And shrouding means to wrap the body in certain pieces of white linen, and it would actually look like a mummy. And so washing, wrapping, the shrouding, and then when we have a funeral prayer that has to be, I believe it's a minimum of 3. And the more Muslims that pray, the more blessings it is for the deceased. It actually elevates them because there's more people saying Ameen with every prayer that's being recited. And Muslim prayers are actually public funerals. We actually do a call out, come pray for this person, because it benefits the deceased. And then when we place the deceased in the grave, we place them facing the holy city of Mecca, the body and the head. And then we like earth burials. So that means no casket. We came from earth and we are placed on earth. So most times you will see a bottomless liner where we place the deceased there. Of course, like, these are the bare minimum that we are responsible for. If there's a culture out there says, no, we have to wash them 11 times, there's no harm, you know? Or our society, our environment doesn't allow not to have a casket. So there's rulings that make it easy for you. Or what we do, if we get a call at nighttime, we're probably going to have that body in the ground by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. What we do in 3 to 5 hours, it probably takes non-Muslim funeral homes 3 to 5 days to do. That's by choice. Most of our funerals, we have a checklist. We don't have very much room for error. We can't miss anything. So we have to go by the checklist. Was that the question about the Muslim burials? Oh, just one more thing. I wanted to add that because we have such a short time, it's all about the deceased. We kind of like, sometimes it's hard to process, especially if it's a sudden death, you know, processing that, oh my God, somebody died, now they're buried, and now they're gone. Sometimes we have to focus on the deceased and their final rites. We kind of don't like, I don't want to say the word that we are kind and we are like supportive of the family, but after the deceased is gone, we focus on the family because we feel like the deceased cannot speak for themselves. We need to speak on their behalf and give them their final Islamic traditional rites, what is prescribed for us. And then when that's finished, we should be focusing on the family. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Very informative. Thank you. Jordana, I was just wondering actually if you had any more information or any input as you worked with the community.
Around the rights of death, I think Salwa has framed it beautifully. That is her area. I know that the services that she provides and the community provides are so instrumental, right? And before there was a massive gap, and what they're doing is very valuable. And I believe Salwa, it's heavily reliable on volunteers, right? And a lot of the seniors that I do work with participate in some way in the rituals around death. And attend funerals. And it is also very meaningful for them to do that for the sense of closure. So, but I think Salwa's captured the details beautifully.
Thank you. This next question is actually for you. As a part of your research, you investigated how we can improve social connectedness and pursue greater health outcomes for aging seniors in immigrant populations. What are some of the social and or health issues that aging immigrant populations might experience?
I think, you know, one of the first things I always try to do is debunk the myth that all older adults who are immigrants in Canada, you know, experience some sort of inequity or are, you know, a burden on the system. And we hear those narratives a lot, especially when they're older adults who are newcomers. On the contrary, it takes massive resilience to build a home in a new country. The work that I see seniors do every day in the community is phenomenal. They volunteer within their ethnocultural communities and beyond. They are holders of culture and religion. They support each other in many, many different ways. So I see a lot of seniors aging well and gracefully here in Canada. Often their lives, if they're immigrants, are connected also back to other places as well. So they have a transnational dimension to their lives, which is really important to reflect on and ask about when working with somebody who has a chronic illnesses or is palliative, is to ask about where home is and what the meaning of home is to them. In terms of key challenges that we see all the time. One is loneliness and social isolation. So when I started my PhD, I went out to ask about how people were managing after a stroke diagnosis. And women, these were Arabic women who were older, 50 plus, and what they wanted to talk about was loneliness. That was their focus, and that sense of isolation. So that became a key aspect of my research. Part of feeling lonely can be because of fragmented social supports, right? Not having people around them or family around them. For newcomers and refugees, that can be very much due to our government's immigration policies around family reunification. We also see a lack of culturally and religiously sensitive services, and specifically where I look at would be things like assisted living, long-term care. I haven't looked at hospice per se, but the literature does say that there are gaps there as well from what I've been reading. And people talk about not just not being able to practice their faith, for example, or maybe have people that understand them to speak their language, but it's a deeper sense of comfort and dignity. You know, is this a space where I can be myself? Is this a space where I have a sense of home? And also, is this a space where people want to hear my stories and bear witness to what I'm going through? So there are some key aspects within our institutions and service provision that we need to really think about carefully when we talk about growing older, but also about death and dying as well. And the final thing I want to touch upon is caregiving. And we know that caregiving is always very much gendered, right? Especially within ethnocultural communities, it's very much women as well who do the giant share of caregiving. And there's a lot of need there for culturally sensitive supports, for opening up conversations around caregiving, around needs, and around their experiences. And so, yeah, I think I've covered some of the main areas I would want to talk about, but I'll leave some other ones for later.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. You actually mentioned something about older populations or immigrant populations might experience feeling lonely and having fragmented social supports. Do you feel that your faith helps bring people together?
We know this from across different religions. This is not a Muslim thing. We know that religion, you know, there's a spiritual dimension to faith, but there's also a social dimension. And certainly faith communities are sites for social support, for social bonding. What we found, Salwa at the mosque she works at, there is a lovely group of seniors that get together once a week. And I think there's a group for men and now there's a group for women, right, Salwa? I believe they've started, both men and women. So yes, during the pandemic, we heard so many stories about older adults having religious lessons on Zoom. So they would get together on Zoom, recite the Quran, and these are people from across the world on the same Zoom session, right? So it's pretty cool. But what I also heard were people saying, yeah, we recited Quran together, but then we would pray because somebody had a death in the family, or someone would ask for advice and we would give them that advice. And so there was a lot of social support cultivated there. And we see this in the research, whether you're looking at mosques or churches or temples, that they are certainly sites of support for older adults.
Thank you so much. Very informative. There's one last question that I'd like to ask, and this is just surrounding grief. Based on your interactions within your communities and in your research, how is grief understood and experienced? Do you have any stories or lessons that either of you have learned that you'd like to share? Maybe Salwa? if you'd like to start.
It's a tough one because it's not one formula for everybody. No matter what steps you say, take this step or this step. It might work for some, not work for others. So it's all over the map how people can take it. But I did notice that, like, for example, the older people maybe that have come from more war-torn countries, like they didn't come here by choice. Whether the immigrants that came here 30, 40, maybe 50 years ago, depending from where, of course, maybe 60 years ago, they came here by choice to build a new home. They're a little bit more settled, their children a little bit more successful. They have homes. They don't really have necessarily a retirement plan, but most of them, their kids are their retirement plan. And then then you have the group that's been coming in for the last 10, 15 years, 20 years. They've been through a lot of grief where this is just kind of like, to them, we look at it like, oh, they're taking it easy or they're handling it so good, but you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And faith is what keeps us together. Like, there's so much rulings of what you could do. There's prayers for giving you patience. There's prayers for the night, for the deceased. There's hope in what you can do for the deceased, how you can elevate them with your prayers, with your actions and your duties, like opening up a charity for them or a well. And so our religion plays a big role of how to handle our grief, but it doesn't work for everybody. Like, I mean, we're only human. Sometimes when there's more poverty, I've noticed when there's more poverty involved and there's more trauma involved in the person's life, they seem to go back to religion a lot more because they feel that these are trials from God, and it's God wants us to be patient, and God wants us to remember Him. So faith plays a really big role in our grief. And of course, when we do a follow-up, if I see, like, a person has 100 cousins and 100 aunts and they've been here a long time, and I'll check in, and yeah, they've got friends and stuff like that. We don't do that much of a follow-up with them. We kind of like look for people that are isolated, that have nobody. Because when they bury somebody, then they go home. Those are the people that we're following up with. Those are the people that we're trying to get a mentor for them, trying to make sure that they kind of, especially if they're older people, we want to get them back into our group. And I don't know, like some of our people, like, that are facing poverty, they don't come around as much as the ones that are doing better at home. So we kind of have to, like, do our job in playing more motivation. Yeah, that's just like one side that I've seen it. But I don't know, what have you seen something, Jordana?
Yeah, Jordana, I'd love to
I
hear
think you're
your
talking
input.
about the intersections here, right? That, people are resilient when they have the social support and they have access to those resources, and those that don't are not as resilient, and coping with grief can be more challenging, even when faith is a tool. Faith isn't the only thing that gets us through hard times, and I think many of us know that. So I echo what Salwa was saying. I think it's also debunking another myth here is that we often think of immigrant communities or Muslim communities which are usually quite collectivist and family oriented. We often think that the individual who is ill or is going through a health crisis, that they have all the support they need, right? Or we might see a lot of family members at the bedside, and we might say, oh, it's going well. And that's might not be true. this individual might still be struggling, and we still need to think about what types of structural supports or barriers are in our systems that prevent these individuals from coming forward and asking for formal forms of support. One of the things I hear again and again from the seniors that I talk about is, and this is most older adults, right? And all of us, we want to be independent, and we don't want to be a burden on our children or our families, right? And we don't expect our kids to take care of us when we're very sick, but they might have to, because we have nowhere else to turn. And what I hear from caregivers again and again is, it is a blessing and an honor to take care of my loved ones, but this is hard, right? And it's even harder when I can't put them in respite care because they don't get the food that they need, or I can't, I'm not comfortable with them dying in a hospital setting or a hospice because I'm not sure that our wishes will be followed through. And it just makes the role of the family, even though it's central, it makes life a little bit more difficult for them, right? So I think as we talk about religious practices and cultural practices, we have to situate that within a context in Canada where we are still not really doing a good job when it comes to culturally sensitive care. There are lots of gaps in the system, and we need to also probably do a lot of more research, a lot of more community engagement, a lot more talking to people to figure out what do they need, and how can we create systems that are sensitive to that. But yeah, I might have gone off topic a bit, but that's
No, that's okay. Thank you for that. And I think you're completely right in that we're trying to build a system that's inclusive and supportive at the same time. And there's lots of people that come from different states, and we need to respect where they're coming from and their wishes. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, that's actually the end of our Q&A. So that brings us to our audience questions. Okay, so before starting the audience questions, someone in the audience shared while Salwa was getting us started. They said, not a question, just want to say I super appreciate that you're opening with this clear intro to Islam. Thank you. So I just thought that was nice to share. Okay. This one is for Jordana. This audience member wants to know if Muslim community members feel differently about hospice and palliative care. During your research in the community, what were the perspectives on aging and end of life?
Thank you so much for asking that. Because I do not specifically ask end of life questions per se in my research, I had to go out and do some digging. It might come up informally, in my conversations, but I was really curious about who in Canada might be doing this work. So I can tell you a bit in what I've seen, but I encourage you also to look at the work of Perrin Dossa, Dossa. So Professor Dossa is from Simon Fraser University and has written on hospice and palliative care of Canadian Muslims. And she has a number of works. I believe there's a book that came out in 2020 and then a number of publications. Her writing is quite beautiful, and I think she captures some really beautiful answers to that question. So I encourage people to take a look at Dossa's work. In terms of what I see, the common sort of thread goes back to this idea of if I access support external to my home, external to my family, will it be the type of support that I need? And what are my choices? Do I have choice? So I've heard stories of people having very positive experiences within the healthcare system, not hospice in particular that I've been looking at, but also people who have said things like, I regret that my elder was placed in long-term care and passed away there. Or when the doctor came to talk to me about end of life, I didn't like what I hear. I don't think we were on the same page. They didn't understand what we wanted, or there was a lot of conflict in our family because of this. So these are some of the things I've heard, but definitely hospice experiences could be looked at more.
Thank you so much. All right, let's see. Oh, where did this go? Perfect. Okay. So this one is a question that says, I would like to know, are there any specific cultural or religious practices that staff need to observe for Muslim patients to make them feel more comfortable during end of life? So either of you, whoever would like to start.
Salwa, I think you can answer this one.
Like it just depends on the patient, because if they have dementia, I think you have your own rules of how to introduce yourself. And I know from my own experience, my dad, that he was a little bit more comfortable with the Muslim nurses. And how do you say that? Oh, I want a Muslim nurse. But in the system here, you can't be honest like that sometimes. That's where the gap is sometimes. Oh, I need an Arabic nurse. But sometimes if it's a Muslim person that doesn't speak Arabic, it still helps with the language of the Quran, of the greeting, of the prayer before eating, of the reminders, of those small reminders and stuff like that. So I know he was more comfortable with someone that reminded him of his prayers before eating, that reminded him of, cultural things that are Islamically cultural together. There's a lot to process when a nurse comes in and says, I don't want to change a male person or a caregiver, because she's really not sworn in nurse or a sworn in doctor, right? Because they would be able to see the opposite sex naked, but a caregiver, they might not be as comfortable, changing a diaper of an older man as much as a man versus a man. So like these kind of things are like icky, because you should be professional, you should just do your job, but it's not always like that. We did open up our funeral society because of the segregation, because of they would go to retrieve a deceased person from the hospital, and the lady would be there and her hijab would slip off, and then people are walking back and forth, professionals of course, but even if they're professionals, it's not acceptable in Islam to be uncovered at any time for the opposite sex. Even if a doctor was to walk in, I mean, it's a limited time of what is acceptable, because he's a professional and he's sworn in and he's your doctor. But at other times, it's not acceptable for him to see you without your hijab, because he's not practicing his doctor on you right now, or you're not his patient at that moment. So there's a lot of little things. I noticed also with like older people, especially our older people here. I noticed that other Muslim communities are starting to do some gatherings at the other Islamic centers, which is great. But I noticed that they have trust issues when they go somewhere else. They're like, if you've served them on a glass plate, they're like, oh, what if pork has been on this plate? And you're like, well, it's washed. Well, no, it has to be kind of purified. You have to wash it 3 times Islamically, and you have to say Bismillah, and you have to say Ashhadu. There's certain practices that they have practiced for many, many, many years. And when they go outside their little comfort zone, they got trust issues. And we get calls all the time from hospice and from hospitals, and from we have a Muslim patient, I think the majority have a good grasp on it, but then there's always that one person that starts that doesn't know. And I think education piece is one person at a time. I think that if you're going to have a new person that's going to be on site, they should have this in the manual. If you have a Jewish patient, this is what the care is. If you have a Muslim patient, you know, there's a lot of rulings, and there's like alcohol. They're always afraid that they're going to cook with alcohol, or they're gonna, you know, there's a lot of things. Purifying, a state of purity is different than a state of clean. If something is clean, that's fine, but there's a certain rituals that we do to purify something. For example, if there was a dog to pee on the grass and the sun hits the grass, we believe that the sun purifies stuff. But if it was indoors, and say somebody stepped on dog pee outside and then came inside and stepped on the rug, that rug isn't pure. Even if you were just clean it, you have to actually clean it a certain way. So trust issues with seniors and with the family, putting their elder in that environment without everybody being educated on that piece. And even if you were to educate these people, they would leave and others would come, and then you just start all over again. So I think it should be part of the system as to the training piece. Yeah.
I'll
Thank
just add
you.
quickly to what Salwa
Yeah,
said,
of course.
because I think she's touched on some important things. There's a couple other things to think about, like really practical things around that question, which is great that someone's asking it. Medication, for example. I was recently in the hospital with an older adult, and she was telling me that she was hiding her meds and tossing them out because she believed that her medication was making her drowsy. It probably was. And she couldn't focus on her prayers. So again, could someone change the timing of medication, right? So that is, if you look at the literature, one of the reasons why Muslim patients might refuse pain medication at end of life or during any kind of health crisis could be because of the need to perform these rituals and not wanting to be limited in that area. Cleanliness is also, I echo Salwa. If it can be a massive source of distress, because in Islam, cleanliness is key to performing many of the religious rituals. And so often I can say for myself as a nurse on a busy ward, we don't often have time to pay a lot of attention to this, but in a perfect world, we would.
Thank you so much. And on that note of learning, is there some sort of book or forms of media or articles maybe that you both know of that could be helpful and just better supporting a Muslim patient, or more information on that?
I think that once we get into the dangers of checklists, we might be a bit in trouble, right? Because you could have a checklist for every culture. And I know in healthcare, when we train our students, we try to avoid that a little bit, because there's always individual interpretations. And the way we believe and practice any faith evolves with who we are throughout our life course, right? I guess the basic is ask families, engage them, be aware of the range of possibilities, and ask and offer support. And often that's your gateway into understanding someone's sort of world and what they value.
Yeah, we have on our website just the basics of, if you want to look on our website under funeral services, if that's what you're looking for, just the basics. We just do the bare minimum what we're prescribed to do. We do have a lot of information on our website about the prayer, about what to expect from just kind of, it's more for the Muslim family what to do, but it is an educational piece of practices of Islamic funerals. On our other, we also have an information center on our website that's just, like she said, it was just from an Islamic perspective. And most of this is for people wanting to be Muslims. So if I would invite you there, it's like I'm going to try to convert you. So if you're going there, go it's just to learn about Muslims. That's a different story. But the Funeral Society, if you want, we can also send you, if anybody works at a hospital or a chaplain or anywhere that you are expecting people to die and you think they're Muslim parents, we can send a package, like a booklet that the family can have, just so that they can make arrangements at a time of need.
Perfect. Salwa, would you just be able to share what the name of your what your website is titled, how to look that up, and where to find all this valuable
Absolutely.
information?
Yeah, can I put it in the chat? It's elrashidmosque.ca.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so you just
That would
have
be
to kind
great.
of browse, browse a little bit for the burials. I guess you
Okay.
could have put a www there.
That's okay.
Yeah, there's on the top, there's for burials, and like I said, it's mostly for families. But the information center is under our programs, and then you can click information center, and it's mostly for Muslims and people practicing Islam, especially the first couple of books. But yeah, if it's of any help that somebody wants to
Yes,
know
of course.
more.
Both of these insights from both of you are very helpful for, I think, everybody in this webinar today. So thank you. This is a question from an end-of-life doula, and they're wondering, from somebody from a different faith tradition, would it be welcome or considered appropriation if I was to be familiar with the Quran, that I might encourage memorization or sharing scriptures, etc., at end of life? So maybe Jordana, if you can touch on that, maybe.
I hesitate to say anything about that. I think that is really something, there is a certain sacredness, of course, around religious texts. That's what I know growing up. You usually have certain rules around cleanliness when you approach the Quran or handle any verses or say them. So my recommendation would be to reach out to your local mosque and imam and have a conversation around what the context of that might be and how you would like to use them. I'm sure they would really welcome that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Salwa, you mentioned that sometimes rulings are different for older people or those who might be experiencing health issues. Can you share some examples of that? This person's asking.
So rulings might be different and for
Yes.
health issues.
Yes.
Well, like for example, if a person is older and cannot fast during the month of Ramadan, then they don't have to, because I mean, I can't just say I'm sick at my age. I have to be sick not to fast. There's actually, it's actually a bad deed if you don't fast. It's actually sinful for us just to kind of make up that you're sick or something. But there are rulings for older people. Sometimes people with dementia, they're not accountable for their prayers and their fasts, and there's ruling for pregnant women. They're not accountable to fast during pregnancy, or if you're sick, or if you have to, there's certain procedures or a surgery, or if their kids are too young. I know a lot of parents, they let their kids fast a half a day or something, the younger ones. But for the elder, it's actually one of our unforgivable sins to neglect our elders in Islam. It's actually an unforgivable sin. So it's very, very important for us to kind of serve them at their old age. And sometimes, because earlier I said that a lot of them came to Canada not by choice in the last decade or two. They came because of war, or because they followed their children here, or or whatever the reason is, or maybe they're just running away from a situation they have back home. These elders are they face the most challenges that we see, the isolation, the poverty, and bringing them, even trying to get them to the community. They face like transportation issues, money to get here, language, and yeah, if you can't make it to the mosque, about the rulings, like for the elders, that's about it, like that I can think of, that they have exceptions for fasting, for not for praying, but definitely if they have dementia or if they're traveling, there's rulings for them. Other rulings for elders, not as much as I can think, more I can think of, but those are about it. Can you think of any, Jordana?
No, I was wondering, I know we don't have a lot of time, Catherine, but I know that there is some questions in the chat around MAID. So that might be a good topic for another discussion, maybe with imams and people who have that biomedical background. But I thought I would quickly answer by, I think, Salwa, the general ruling around MAID in Islam is that assisted dying is not accepted. And I looked across, there are many schools of thought in Islam, just like Christianity is an umbrella term. So is Islam, there are many schools. And it seems pretty universal, the perspective that MAID is not embraced. And then the caveat to that is that does not mean every Muslim would not choose it. There are always those individual conversations. But it's important, I think, to be aware of that for those people who ask that question.
Yeah, and even if you have an elder, even if you have an elder on life support and there's no hope, you actually have to call the imams and get a ruling, a special ruling to pull off the life support. You should never do it on your own, because I'm not sure why. I think it's just part of our religion. That's just the way it is. You do not end life. It has to be a decision that's the best interest of the deceased, the elder.
Yeah, I
So
think
we get a lot of calls about that.
Yeah, I would think so. I think there's a lot written and discussed on that in the literature, but I just wanted to give like a quick answer because I saw some people posted that.
Yes, lots of people were interested in that answer. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. And perhaps we can have another webinar that speaks a little bit more about that, and maybe with Imam.
I think that would be important because they would be able to discuss sort of the philosophical and sort of normative ethics around that and why that is.
Right.
But I think from a social lens, from somebody who, as a nurse who deals with health and death and dying, I always go back to the individual and say having that conversation with an individual in the family should always be an option.
Thank you so much for touching upon that. I think we have enough time for one more. So this question is, in situations when brain death has been determined medically, but cardiac death is not imminent, the medical team will usually talk to family about withdrawal of certain interventions, such as breathing tubes, and allow natural death. How are these conversations best approached with Muslim families? And when does death occur from the perspective of Islam?
Again, that's a great question, I think, Salwa, for an imam to bring on. So an imam is a Muslim religious scholar, and some of them have, a lot of them have PhDs in these areas, and they can talk about it in great detail. So I can't specify, I would not want to get into details without that in-depth background knowledge. Salwa, you might have something to say.
Yeah, like I told you, it's case by case. It's a family. I mean, we have it every day where every time the imam goes to the hospital, it's totally a different case, a different scenario, different families, and it's just case by case. We had one story about 2-3 years ago. A young boy was in a coma for two months, And the mother just couldn't let go. And the imam went, and the imam said, his heartbeat is still going and there's still hope. I think we should leave him for another couple of weeks and then come back and visit. And the boy woke up, So the imam felt really good about making that call at that time. But it could be a different scenario. It just depends on the medical, the family. Like Jordana says, it's the family with the imam and what they come up with. Every case is different.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think, like I mentioned, maybe another webinar, we will speak to an imam and get a little bit more insight on that. But thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your valuable, honest, and lovely experiences in different social sectors. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. So thank you so much, Salwa and Jordana, for joining us today. Webinars like this one and all of our other compassionate services are provided free of charge to Canadians navigating end of life, their loved ones, and their healthcare providers. To enable us to continue providing these services, please consider making a charitable donation. We will put the link in the chat in case anyone would like to donate. Thank you to our audience for joining us today, and have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you again so much, Jordana and Salwa, for today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.